Hi, welcome to Yoga Selection. My name is Rod. Today's class, Vrischikasana, scorpion pose. Make sure that you've got a yoga chair, make sure that you've got a block, a clear wall space, and your mat directly up against a wall. Now, a good idea with Vrischikasana, if you're comfortably and regularly practicing Pincha mayurasana, and a good idea if you can sustain that pose, hold that pose comfortably for, say, between 45 seconds up to a minute, managing to maintain lift in your shoulders, supporting your lower back, and ideally not being too dependent on yoga props when practicing that pose. So common in forearm balance to require a belt around the elbows, a block between the hands, and also with Vrischikasana you can work with those props initially, but eventually you're going to be working in the middle of the room, you'll be free balancing, potentially losing your balance, and important that you're able to make quick and smart adjustments with your hands and your elbows. It can feel a little constraining, even a little bit dangerous at times, having the elbows bound with a belt when we get to that stage. But in today's class it will be more of an introductory look and a systematic way of approaching the pose that will enable you to gradually at your own pace grow and improve with the pose. So Pincha mayurasana is a really good starting point. There's lots of similarities between Pincha mayurasana and Vrishikasana. There's also some very major differences, but Pincha mayurasana is a really good place for us to start. So let's head there now. Maybe just before we actually get into the pose, I'll be describing a fairly specific region of the body, and good if we just establish that before we're then looking down at the floor and in the pose ourselves. So it's simply where the collarbones and the sternum bone meet, this region here, right at the upper part of the chest. So that's what I'll be referring to, and I'll probably describe it as where the collarbones meet. So let's come down ready for Pincha mayurasana. We'll have the wrists shoulder width, fingertips touching the wall, the elbows directly under the shoulders, as we do in Pincha mayurasana without the belt, knowing that the weight of the body tends to push the elbows out. We're working to contain the elbows. This is that little bit of a squeezing action of the elbow joints towards the center of the mat, and one which, when we're in the pose, generates lift. So lift is, of course, really important. We need to lift through the shoulders, we need to lift through the lower back, and crucial importance and linking with Vrischikasana, that region that we've just looked at where the collarbones meet. So making sure that that region of the body is lifting as high as possible away from the floor. So let's find that now before we go any further, where the collarbones meet, lift up. Now, where you look is very important and different between the two poses, but here for Pincha mayurasana, let's look down at the floor, say roughly halfway between the wrist and the elbow. The face will be at this stage more or less parallel with the floor. Okay, so between the collarbones, lifting up as you straighten your legs. You press your wrist down, emphasize the inner wrist pressing down so that you lift up through the shoulders, but be still more specific there where the collarbones meet, lift as high as possible, and then maintaining that lift, exhale, and kick up into the pose. So pressing the forearms down where the collarbones meet, lift as high as possible. Now the front ribs at this stage, they're lifting up with the collarbones. You might feel that the lower back is hanging a little. We want to make sure that it's lifting. So tailbone in and up, we're lifting the back of the pelvis away from the spine. You need to use your leg strength to achieve that. Grip with the thigh muscles and lift with the legs, the pelvis up and off the spine. You're looking with your eyes down at the floor there between the forearms. Okay, and then release down and rest there for a moment in Virasana forwards with your hips back to your heels. So the lift in the collarbones, a really good common linking point between the two poses. The position of the head and where we look is very different. Just so that we can clarify that, let's just bring the forearms back into position, the elbows down. So as we were just then looking down at the floor between the forearms, roughly the face is parallel with the floor, And in Vrischikasana, eventually when we're more deeply into the pose, our head is considerably more lifted. And we're looking more towards where the thumbs are. And just when you see someone in the pose, the angle of the face, it's roughly 45 degrees relative to the floor. So we've gone from looking down to lifting the head, 45-degree angle. Now, the neck needs to be comfortable in making that adjustment to the pose, to the head position. So important that that region of the upper back near the neck is lifting and contained, moving into the body. The trapezius muscle does the lifting off the neck, and that bit of the thoracic spine just before the neck, it needs to be contained and move deep and into the body. This time when we kick up, we'll be not just lifting the lower back, but making sure that that trapezius area is lifting so that we can then make some extra room for the neck. And then we'll be looking first to the elbows, then to the mid forearm, then to the wrists, eventually, ultimately, towards the tips of the thumbs. So let's try it now. So raise up, lifting the collarbones, but also the trapezius, lift it up and off the neck. You need to press firmly down with the forearms to achieve that. And then kicking up and into the pose. We need to generate lift there in the lower back. We're lifting the collarbones, we're lifting the shoulders, but also the trapezius as we look now towards, first of all, the elbows, then that region of the mat mid-forearm, the region of the mat level to the wrists. Now lifting the trapezius still higher, look towards the tips of the thumbs. Okay, and then release down and come all the way down. So it can be challenging for the neck if that trapezius area is dropping. So a really good indicator as to when you're ready to start venturing into Vrischikasana, when you gain the ability in Pincha mayurasana to lift the trapezius muscle and direct your gaze more towards the thumbs. So we're lifting the shoulders, supporting the neck, supporting the lower back. We want to make sure that we can maintain that as we start to add a little bit more of a back bending aspect to the pose. Now the way we can do it, we'll still for the time being keep our knees straight, but we'll move ourselves a little bit further away from the wall. It also just gets us a little more familiar with being able to use the chair. It's a little bit of a halfway point between Pincha mayurasana and Vrischikasana. Make sure that your chair is secure and the back of your chair firmly up against the wall. We're going to be gripping the front legs of the chair quite firmly. We're going to be holding with both hands the front legs of the chair. It means that your thumbs are in this position pointing upwards towards the ceiling. Once you've determined that, you can also wrap the thumbs around the front legs of the chair. Important that your elbows are able to retain their shoulder width distance. If you find that they're uncontrollably splaying out wider than the shoulders, often that's an indicator that you probably need to stay with and consolidate your forearm balance for the time being. The head position, let's just for the time being try to keep the face more parallel with the floor, looking down at that mid forearm point. Once we're in the pose, we'll see if we can lift the head that little bit higher, looking more towards where the wrists are. Okay, be ready. Raise up your pelvis. Check that the elbows are contained. Exhale and kick up. And the first thing we notice is it's more challenging for the lower back. So walk the heels higher up the wall, lift the back of the pelvis up, move your tailbone in so that there's more space there for the lumbar spine. And then pressing your wrist down to make sure that you're lifting through the shoulder region. Collarbones lift as high as possible, trapezius lift as high as possible, and then looking with the eyes more towards the wrists. Okay, and then release down and virasana forwards. So in this particular tutorial, we're getting quite quickly into some of these more advanced back bend movements. Often it's a good idea to do a little bit of warming up prior to going directly into your Vrischikasana. And particularly in the circumstances of this tutorial, good if we have a nice transition movement that both warms the body up and gives you some really clear understanding of actions that are fundamental to the pose. So we're going to stay using our chair. Maybe good if I just quickly show this sequence and then we can work with it together. Eventually we're going to be placing a block between our hands in this pose. Now if you've got someone around you, the easiest thing to do will be for them to, when you're in position, place that block for you between the hands. But more than likely you don't have someone to help you with that. So because of that, we're going to just initially place the block here, and it does nothing other than just put it in a convenient spot where we can easily reach it. As we come to here, so I've got my sacrum resting onto the block, I'm lying myself back and making sure that I can hold with my hands, both hands, the front legs of the chair. So the job of the block is not to elevate the hips. It's just so that we know where the block is. As we bring our feet onto the seat of the chair, we then lift up, and then we're ready to maneuver that block, and we can just take one hand off the chair to do it. We just slide it up so that the block comes adjacent to where the shoulder blades are. So I can just feel with my shoulder blades now where the block is. I'll bring my hands then under my shoulders and slide onto the top of my head. At this point I'm in a 3-point head balance position. I just bring my head back, and at this point I can just lightly feel where the block is. From there, again, one hand at a time, bring my hands onto the block. It might be initially that you're gripping the block as I am with the fingers, just to slide that block firmly into position so it touches the back of the skull. Then though, we can spread the fingers and working with that lift in the shoulders, that containment in the upper back. And then when it's time to come out of the pose, we bring our hands back under the shoulders, we keep our elbows shoulder width, and we lift up to Urdhva Dhanurasana. And then from there, we can release down. We remove the block. Let's try it. So having the block there near to the seat of the chair. Now we need to get in very close to the chair, feet, legs either side of the chair, and then we can lift the block up, lift the pelvis up and onto the block, and then lie back. Make sure that you've got both hands gripping the front legs of the chair. Feet then come up onto the seat of the chair and pressing the feet down, feet are hip width as we lift our hips up. That movement that we've been working with in Vrischikasana and Pincha mayurasana, lifting the back of the pelvis up and away from the spine. We keep one hand on the chair. With the other hand, we just reach down, take the block and slide it higher up so that the block is still flat to the floor, but the edge of the block is now touching the shoulder blade area. We then bring the hands under the shoulders, make sure that your wrists are shoulder width. And at this point, we're on the back of the skull. The head keeps its contact to the floor as we press down with the hands, but we slide up and then onto the top of the head. At this point, we're more or less directly on the top of the head. And just make sure that you've come far enough back with the skull so that you can feel where the block is. That way we can easily, in a moment, take hold of it with our hands. Before we do though, in this 3-point head balance position, press the heels of your hands down. Resist your elbows back towards your shoulders. Lift your shoulders upwards towards the ceiling. That trapezius area, the spine there in the trapezius area, contained, lifting. And then one hand at a time, we reach back and take hold of the block. Initially, you might need to grip the block with your fingers, wrapping them around the edges of the block. Once you've got the block in position and are comfortable in the pose, straighten the fingers, fan them apart, press your index finger bases firmly into the edges of the block. Make sure that your elbows are retaining shoulder width distance, don't allow them to splay wider. Now we press the wrist down. Importantly also we need to press our elbows down to generate lift through the shoulder area. At this point, as the chest starts to open more, we're rolling a little more towards the forehead. We could even start to lift the head off the floor here and look towards the block. That's a good movement, but more importantly we get that sense of the region of the spine near the base of the neck moving deep and into the body. The trapezius muscle lifting up and off the neck. And then we just leave the block where it is. We return our hands back to the 3-point head balance position. Make sure your elbows are staying shoulder width, and then pressing your hands down. Lift up, straighten your elbows, and then lower yourself down onto the back of the skull. We can just move that block out of the way and lower the hips all the way down. So a really good pose as we just bring our feet to the floor and remain there for a moment. A good pose, a complementary pose to Vrischikasana, one that works really well, particularly in a short sequence like this, if you're working to get to Vrischikasana relatively quickly. Okay, let's head more directly to the pose now. So, leaving the chair there, we'll put the block off to the side. So some really key actions, and let's just clarify them. That area where the collarbones meet, lifting as high as possible. So it's beyond the shoulders lifting. It is that, but it's more than that. The sternum bone, once we're in Vrischikasana, it's actually moving forwards in the direction of the chair. So you need to be prepared for that. The collarbone's lifting as high as possible, and then the sternum bone, it's moving forwards. And that enables that lift in the head. Think of the face being more of a 45-degree angle, where as if we're bringing the head up towards the seat of the chair. Of course, we need to make sure that we're supporting the trapezius area and the lower back as well. This time, we're going to actually work to kick up. We'll begin with our legs straight, but then we're going to bend our knees and bit by bit walk our toes down the wall and onto the top of the chair. We're anchoring our pose with our forearms. We're standing on our forearms as we do in forearm balance. We need quite a light touch with the toes. The toes very sensitively just feeling the wall, feeling for the top of the chair. Eventually we'll have the option of coming down lower, but initially we just want the confidence of knowing where the top of the chair is. It might be, if you're just starting with Vrischikasana, that's too far down. So don't panic if you don't feel the top of the chair. It might be that you just a little bit get used to bending the knees, walking the toes a little bit down the wall, and then over time you'll feel the top of the chair, and then when you're ready, eventually the feet onto the seat of the chair. In terms of how our hands are positioned, it will vary from person to person. It can be a little bit how wide your shoulders are relative to the width of the yoga chair that you have. Probably the most common way of having the hands, and a good starting point if you're new to it, is to place the front feet of the chair in that V, the webbing there in between the index finger and the middle finger. And when I do that, for me, it keeps my wrists shoulder width, a generous shoulder width distance. Now, that's a good place to start, but good also just to feel a few other options. You might want to, and often better for people with smaller shoulder frame, if they bring their arms completely through the frame of the chair, or bring their hands through the frame of the chair, and the feet of the chair is just lightly touching the base of the little finger. For others, they like to have the chair between the middle and the neighbouring finger. So you can try a few of those options and just come with the approach that feels best for you and your shoulders. Now, purposefully, intentionally, we have been working with a lot of the technique in the more supported versions of the pose, and I would recommend that for learning this pose. And that way you can internalise those techniques that then come more intuitively when we're in a position that is a little more out of our comfort zone. So we don't want to be thinking too much when we get to this point of approaching Vrischikasana, we want to be confident that we've internalized, understood all of those techniques and able to relatively intuitively apply them. Where the collarbones meet, lift up as high as possible. Without dropping there, slide the sternum bone forwards. It's the sternum bone that slides forwards towards the chair, not the shoulders. Keep the shoulders lifting and plugging back into the body. Tuck your toes under and raise up. So collarbones lift. You're looking towards the hands here, making sure that your shoulders resisting back into the body. As we then kick up to the wall, just the toes to the wall, and then we can start to bend the knees step by step, bit by bit. We walk the toes down towards the top of the chair. It doesn't matter if you don't reach. And then pressing the forearms down, lift up through the shoulders, lift up through the trapezius, pressing the toes into the wall, lift the back of the pelvis, and looking towards the wrists, towards the thumbs. And then walk the toes back up, keep one foot to the wall, and lower yourself back down and Virasana forwards. And a pose that very much benefits from repetition within the one sequence. So when you're practicing Vrishikasana, it might not be that you just do it the once and move on, but 2, 3, 4 attempts, and you'll find that the body starts to mold into the pose a little more as you progress with the repetitions. So with that in mind, let's just go again, just those same points. Toes to the wall, very light touch with the toes as we walk the toes down towards the top of the chair. Hands in position. There's 3 areas to be working with: lifting the shoulders, lifting the trapezius, and lifting through the lower back. As we kick over, once the toes come to the wall, walking down the wall, wrists press down, lift through the shoulders, lift through the trapezius, lift the back of the pelvis up, and then looking towards the thumbs. Sternum moves forwards, lifting the collarbones as high as possible. Walk the feet back up, keep one foot to the wall, and Virasana forwards. And then back to upright position. So, just for the sake of the tutorial today, we'll have one more attempt at the pose. The option this time of walking the toes down the chair. Now I have seen people, and relatively common, to use the side frame of the chair to walk the toes down, and that way you can get to the seat of the chair. For me personally, I don't like to move too far to the sides of the chair. I find the chair more stable when I know exactly where the center is. So we'll be bringing the feet down to the top of the chair. Once you've done that, you keep one set of toes to the top of the chair. With the other foot, you search out the seat of the chair. It might just be touching it and then bringing it back to the top of the chair. Touching with the other foot, bringing it back to the top of the chair. Eventually, you'll be able to bring both sets of toes down to the seat of the chair. At that point, you can think about bringing the heels down. Once we can start to press the heels down, we can use the legs to get even improved leverage to lift the shoulders and get that head position. Remember, the head, eventually more of a 45-degree angle. We're looking more through to the wall between the legs of the chair. So, last go at it. The option this time of bringing the feet down onto the seat of the chair. Raise up, walk in, exhale, find the top of the chair, and then bringing the feet down onto the seat of the chair. From there, the heels down, those that can, pressing the forearms down, lifting through the shoulders, and bringing the top of the head towards the seat of the chair. And then walk the feet back up the wall and Virasana forwards. We're going to leave Vrischikasana there. Good though if we release our back, we've got the chair there. A nice easy way of doing that is to come to chair mayurasana. Sitting in the chair, quite far back in the chair, feet just a little bit wider than the front legs of the chair. Make sure that the inner knees can fit your shoulders between them as we reach forwards, hands down to the floor, neck release, head hang. Keep the sitting bones anchored back into the seat of the chair. You can then fold your arms if your back feels ready. If that's too intense for the back, then just keep the hands to the floor. I'll give some options for taking the pose further, but if you feel that your back is releasing better in that initial stage, then you're more than welcome just to remain that way. From arms fold, we can then bring the hands through the frame of the chair. You can grip either, I've got a crossbar there that works well. If you don't have the crossbar, then just holding the back legs of the chair. Anchor the sitting bones, lift your head, move your chest forwards whilst keeping the sitting bones anchored down. Okay, and then as you're ready, you can come up. Okay, Vrischikasana. Thank you for practicing with Yoga Selection.